Hi, my name is Catherine Moore, and I have been talking on YouTube and posting videos about my experience growing up at the Texas Annual Conference and the fact that my father was a sexual predator and he was employed under the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist denomination in Houston, Texas. It took decades. It took a long time for me to process everything that happened. And there are people in the conference that I know still that probably think that because they knew my father, that they really knew our family, but they did not. And it would not surprise me if there are people who do not believe that I was related to someone who is a part of the conference history and had a very important role and a very important relationship with the conference. He was a lay. He wasn't, his name was Judge Hassel, and he was not employed as a clergy. He was a judge, an elected judge, and he lived in Cherokee County. So he was on important committees within the conference, Lakeview Conference Center, Lakeview Methodist Center encampment, and he was also the chairman of the board of trustees at Lawnmowers College, and he was also the chairman. He was the top chair for the trustees for the Texas Annual Conference. For someone who is a lay person to have that many roles on committees that are top governing roles on committees is not very common. And I did not really begin to process that. I knew about him from the time that I was a kid. And I know that my mother hit a constable, hit his car. I don't know, maybe 5. She somehow got out of that, and I'm sure that it was because of her relation to Judge Morris Hassel. And I know that Judge Hassel did know the Hassel family that I was raised around. And I think Judge Hassel probably spent more time around people within the United Methodist denomination than he did his own extended family, because the Hassel family tends to be very loud and dysfunctional. They are not as educated, clearly not as educated as Judge Hassel was. And their life was it was not as structured. The Hassel family was very poor. And my plan growing up, my life goal was not to expose the Texas Annual Conference. That was the last thing that I wanted to do. I actually was very passionate about the Texas Annual Conference. I was very passionate about the United Methodist denomination. It was very important to me, in my relationships within the Texas Annual Conference and the United Methodist denomination was also very important to me. And the last thing I ever wanted was for that to go south. However, when I started facing my abuse, I had to choose. And I was not willing to lose myself for the sake of maintaining a relationship with an organization that did not care about my well-being. Because the Texas Annual Conference administration of the United Methodist denomination could care less about anybody that is a victim of sexual assault or domestic violence, or anyone who is a victim of sexual harassment that's associated with any of the churches within their conference administration. They could care less about the victims. They don't care. And they would prefer that the victims just fade away and disappear in whatever way possible. And I saw that with Marla Tabb. Dateline covered the story of when Marla Tabb was murdered in Troop, Texas, and Michael Tabb was sentenced to 55 years in prison. When I was in college at UT, there was a pond across from a yard. This was in the early 2000s during the trial when Michael Tabb was being tried. And they were draining the pond, and I was walking across the property, and I asked what was going on. Why were they draining the pond? And it was because Michael Tabb had attempted suicide in that pond, and he threw the knife in the pond. There were signs of problems before Marla Tabb was brutally murdered in a Methodist parsonage at a church that was under the administration of the Texas Annual Conference. Now, the Texas Annual Conference could say today, well, they are no longer under our administration. That does not matter. What is important, the important detail, is that while First United Methodist Church in Troop, Texas was under the Texas Conference administration, that murder took place. And there were signs of abuse and domestic violence. Another example, a story that I don't share very often. There was one time in particular when my father was employed under the Texas Annual Conference administration, and he had been assigned at two churches in Price, Texas. It's also known as Carlisle, Texas, and it's also known, I was at a friend's house in Henry's Chapel, Texas. It's just outside of Troop, Texas. And I was swimming in the swimming pool of church members on their property. My mother was insulting me the entire time. I was probably third or fourth grade. I was in the third grade. My mother was insulting me the entire time I was swimming in the pool. And I don't know if Pam noticed. I don't know what she was thinking. I don't know if she picked up on the fact that my mother was insulting me the entire time. And the reason why my mother was insulting me was because I was not confident in my swimming skills, and I still had some fear of the water. And it was probably because of the trauma I had experienced before. And there was also an incident where I almost drowned, and I had been rescued before my father became employed by the conference. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. Okay. So right after when we were about to leave, or it was just close to time that we were going to leave, my mother started threatening me. And I didn't find out until decades later that what she did was against the law. And unfortunately, by the time I realized it was against the law, there was nothing I could do because the statute of limitations had passed. My mother said that she was going to bring me back to the pool and throw me in. I was afraid for my life. Some people may not think that's a big deal, but it was a big deal to me at the time. I was terrified. I was afraid that she was going to bring me back to that pool and just let me drown. And this was while my father was employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration. During that moment, eventually I moved on and forgot about it, but for as long as I could remember that, shortly after she told me that, I was afraid for my life. I was afraid that my mother was going to take me down to Pam's pool and shove me in the water and just let me drown. And as a child, for a child to be in fear of your own life, that something is going to happen to you, that you, I felt worthless. I felt like I was a waste of space, that I had such little value to anybody, that no one cared if I lived or died. And that is quite a bit for a child to have to carry. And not only that, but I hated myself and I was ashamed of my own body. And for a child to have to go through that is absolutely horrific. And for the conference administration to not care about the victims of sexual assault or child abuse of any kind or domestic violence or even murder, for them to not care about the victims whose lives are affected is absolutely unforgivable. It is inexcusable, immoral, unethical, and I don't see how the Texas Annual Conference can even talk about morality and clergy conduct when they have no interest in resolving or assisting victims who have struggled to move on. I struggled with homelessness. I've struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder. And when I talk about my experience with the Texas Annual Conference, these tapes play in my head of what other clergy that I knew, that I no longer speak with, who would probably say to me is, oh, well, Kay, you're just mentally ill. They don't really care. Or, Kay, it's so narcissistic of you to even talk about your experience and what happened to you, and to even think that they care, because they don't care about you. They don't care about what you went through. You're mentally ill. And what is it about mental health that somehow justifies going through abuse? I have never understood that. It just doesn't make sense. I was talking to my husband today, and he said something that really meant a lot to me, because it is a thought I still struggle with, because I will be spending the rest of my life recovering. And I still struggle today. I can't have a relationship with my sons because I lost custody of them. And I can't see them because I was kicked out of supervised visitation because I was not okay with being sexually harassed at South Main Baptist Church while I was visiting them by an employee at with the domestic relations office. And I was not okay with being sexually harassed at St. Stephen's by a visiting parent because I wasn't there to pick up a date. I was there to visit my kids. And I was not there to be exploited in another United Methodist Church. I was there to visit my kids that I lost custody of. I was forced into a supervised visitation program based on false accusations that were never proven. And they've been lying to the public. The Domestic Relations Office has been lying to the public. There was, I have never been arrested. There's no history of arrest. There's no incarceration. I've never been incarcerated. I've never been criminally charged of anything. And there is no solution. And what my husband said was, I questioned, if I was put here to be abused, if that was my sole purpose in life, then why am I here? And his response to me was so that I could show the Texas Annual Conference how wrong they were. And that I was not as weak as they thought I was. I think that I know the Texas Annual Conference would have wanted me in the supervised visitation at a United Methodist Church because that way they were probably hoping it would silence me. We've got her visiting our kids in supervised visitation. Maybe that'll shut her the hell up. And she'll stop talking about how we employ sexual predators and place them on assignment in our churches. But it didn't work. Because now I can't see my kids. I have one son that wants the other son dead because he has a psychiatric disorder and he's not getting treatment. And now the Texas Annual Conference and multi-billion-dollar administration has found themselves in a nasty battle between two parents in a high conflict situation, highly abusive. And I can see why some people would think I'm crazy, but I've provided documentation. I've provided documentation all over social media about Alicia Provost Whitfield, sorry. And this is not acceptable. I understand. I think my thinking is people must think it was acceptable because it was me. But why is what I don't understand. Because trying to silence me didn't work. I spoke with one of the attorneys who handled the case with the Pearland United Methodist denomination. And I noticed a very real difference between speaking with her and actually speaking with Harrison Fisher and communicating with him. Because she did not really necessarily need to know how the conference administration worked. She wasn't interested in telling me that the conference administration was going to retaliate because I spoke with her. In fact, that's what Harrison Fisher did. He told me that the Texas Annual Conference was going to retaliate. He was the attorney. It was his responsibility to protect me. It was his responsibility to protect Alicia Provost Whitfield's identity, and he didn't. And I am the one who got the brunt of all of that. I got caught in the middle of all of that, and I had no desire to be caught in the middle of it. And I also wanted to add, I didn't process Judge Hassel's involvement with the conference right away. And it was important because I had the understanding that my relationship with the Texas Annual Conference didn't just start and end with my parents. That there's a significant family history there. And Judge Hassel grew up in the conference himself and was very involved. But what happened to me should not happen to anyone. Even if I feel in my mind, I have processed it by thinking, well, it's because I deserved it. It shouldn't have happened to me. And it wasn't just, I'm not the only one who's been affected. My kids have been affected. I made attempts to repair my relationship with the Texas Conference and with the United Methodist Church. I made attempts to move forward. And when I was visiting my kids, after being forced to visit my kids at churches and supervised visitation, especially since I was forced into it, I don't go to church anymore. I have no desire to attend church. And visiting my kids at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church played a big part in that. After being followed to the restroom, watching other parents be violated and exploited at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church, knowing the history of the Texas Annual Conference, employing somebody who was capable of murder, employing clergy who were capable of sexually assaulting children. That was when I knew I wanted nothing else to do with the United Methodist denomination. And I didn't begin to expose it until 2019, late 2019. There was a day when I was sitting in the fellowship hall of St. Stephen's United Methodist Church, and I was sitting there crying. No one saw me, but I was sitting there crying, because that's what you do when you grow up with abuse. If you're going to cry and fall apart, you make sure nobody notices. And I knew I was done with the United Methodist denomination. That I had experienced an evil side of them that I had no idea that existed. And I knew that it was no accident that I was being forced to visit our sons at a United Methodist Church that was under an administration that employed my father, who was a child molester. And I contacted the conference administration, and they knew that I was there, and they did nothing. They could have resolved this. They could have helped me get an attorney, retain an attorney, and they could have helped me get out of the supervised visitation. They could have helped me come up with a solution. And they chose not to. And I'm sure they'll just write me off and say, well, I'm just crazy. She's mentally ill. Yes, I am mentally ill with a psychiatric disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of the trauma that I experienced from the Texas Annual Conference, because of having to relive the trauma that I went through as a child by visiting our sons at a United Methodist Church under the Texas Annual Conference administration. And I'm sure that there was hope that that would somehow shut me the hell up, but it didn't. I will continue to talk about it until my last breath, because what the Domestic Relations Office is doing is wrong. And the fact that the Texas Annual Conference is even associated with the Domestic Relations Office and what they are doing with the supervised visitation program, exploiting parents and children, is disgusting. They take parents and children outside in the heat, and you are not allowed to go back in if it's too hot. Parents with toddlers are forced to go outside in the heat at the supervised visitation. Is the Texas Annual Conference okay with this? Is this okay? I mean, because the Texas Annual Conference wrote a letter, an apology letter, and let me mention something else about the apology letter. That letter was wrote and read to clergy, and the only reason why it was read to clergy was because they didn't want clergy to begin to ask questions. They just wanted to say, look, we're sorry, we've made these mistakes, we'll try not to do it again. But they don't offer therapy for victims of sexual assault or sexual harassment or domestic violence. They don't help pay for that therapy. And when I'm talking about offering therapy, because clearly with their seminary degree, they're just not intelligent enough to get it. When I'm talking about helping out with therapy, I'm talking about paying for therapy and letting the victim choose who they want their therapist to be. With trauma-informed therapists, I'm talking about assisting anyone who have experienced severe trauma within their administration by assisting with living expenses, with food expenses. I'm not just talking about a petty little letter. Oh, gee, we're sorry. We'll try not to do it again. With everything I have seen, and I'm quite sure, even though I never met Judge Morris Hassel, I am quite sure that Judge Hassel, knowing one of his own family members went through, was with what the Texas Conference put one of his family members through, that he would want the Texas Annual Conference to resolve it. I don't think he would have approved. I don't know what he was like. I know that a lot of people in the Hassel family are far from saints. I'm sure Judge Hassel was a decent person. I would hope that he was fair. I know that he knew some of my family. I remember my cousin telling me that my Uncle Lincoln And Effie telling me that his dad, my Uncle Lincoln, and him had met with Judge Hassel privately, probably for some kind of trouble that Effie got into, because they were far from saints. And my Uncle Lincoln was not a nice person. And I heard about the domestic violence situations that he was involved in with his wife and how violent he was with her. And I am sure that Judge Hassel was very familiar with that side of the Hassel family. And unlike Judge Hassel, I was raised around that side of the Hassel family, and I was raised within the Texas Annual Conference administration. So I got both worlds. And being raised in the Hassel family taught me to be strong. They taught me to stand up for myself. And that is what you are seeing right now. And what my kids will see is the resilience and the determination that I have. I still struggle today. I find it very hard to get a job. When I went into psychiatric treatment and I was diagnosed with PTSD, my TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, was high. It was 10.4 because I had been going years. I knew I had an autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's, and it was not being treated because I was so overwhelmed with the trauma that I had been through from the Texas Annual Conference and also from my ex-husband. And the stress of what I've been through with the Texas Annual Conference affects my health today. One of my cars was withheld from me by Harrison Fisher, and I'm sure that the Texas Annual Conference was involved. It was withheld from me for 7 months, and I had to fight to get my Subaru Forester back. And Dr. Jim Hastings with Helping Hands Ministry helped have my car towed. And Elsie Martin Simon helped pay for the tow. And because of the trauma I've been through, I deal with brain fog. I don't like to be around people. I don't have too many friends these days, and honestly, I really don't want any right now. Not anybody that I'm close with. I have my husband. He's wonderful, and he's been my support. And he knew about this from the moment that we met. I told him on our first date, and it was helpful because I already had it out on the internet, and so he could easily research it and see that what I put out on the internet matched what I told him. And he's been supportive. He agrees in my efforts of exposing the Texas conference. He sees beyond the trauma that I've experienced. He sees the effects of the trauma. I have nightmares on a regular basis. I am a lot less trusting of people. I don't trust churches. I am trained in opera. And the trauma that I've been through has also affected my voice and my ability to sing. I used to sing in churches. I have a range of several octaves. And so the only voice that I can use now is to tell my story. Because there will be no more opportunities to sing, because no one wants to hear anybody sing who's been through abuse. And I'm sure that the Texas Conference thinks that by ignoring what I've been through and ignoring what I'm saying about them is okay. But the reason why this is a huge mess is because of their mistakes. And the biggest mistake, along with employing clergy who were abusive or capable of murder, is being involved with the supervised visitation program with the Domestic Relations Office of Harris County. This is not a good look for them. And it is unfortunate for them that I know enough about the United Methodist denomination and their policies and their administrative processes that I know how to reach people in administrative roles. I also wanted to talk about that there is an article in Texas Monthly about Michael Tabb, who was convicted of murder, and he was employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration. And in this article, it compares the similarities in the personality of Walker Rayleigh and Michael Tabb. This should be a huge embarrassment for the Texas Conference, publicly. This is not on the level of Texas Monthly writing an article about the mission work that Texas Conference is doing, or the assistance that the Texas Conference is doing for providing victims of domestic violence from their clergy, or providing some type of financial assistance for sexual abuse survivors. This article is comparing personalities of one man that was acquitted of a crime, but people who knew him personally within the Texas Conference, because I spoke with them, believed he was guilty. This is just beyond disturbing. And it's embarrassing, really. And I think that this is something that the United Methodist denomination as a whole, along with the Texas Annual Conference should look at. An article published by Texas Monthly comparing a minister that murdered his wife that was employed under their administration with a minister who was acquitted of his wife's murder. Even though Peggy Rayleigh survived more than a decade, it's still considered a murder because she passed away from her injuries. I also found out over the years, after speaking with a cousin who was in the Missouri Conference, his father was a district superintendent in the Missouri Conference. And my cousin that I spoke with, he's probably in his 80s today. He considered dating Peggy Rayleigh. And I knew, because when a pastor dates, they date for marriage. They're not dating just to be a serial dater. They are dating for marriage. If he had dated Peggy Rayleigh, she would be alive today. And that was shocking for me, because I've seen a lot and I've heard a lot. And looking into my family history and looking at the hassle involvement with the Texas Conference was beneficial in understanding where I came from and understanding the significance that I am far more than just what happened to me, and I am far more than I'm not who my parents were. I'm better than them. And to be honest, I would rather die than put someone through what my parents put me through. I would rather die than put someone through what the Texas Annual Conference has put the victims of their clergy through. Because it is unfathomable. And the Texas Annual Conference administration of the United Methodist denomination should be ashamed, because they are not sorry.